Before Al Capone ruled Chicago, Detroit had a gang so feared, so unpredictable, that even Capone gave them a wide berth. They were flashy, ruthless, and utterly untouchable. They were called the Purple Gang. Detroit's immigrant neighborhoods suffered from widespread poverty, as did many in major cities at the beginning of the 20th century. To survive, some residents turned to crime, which they enforced with violence. The Hastings Street neighborhood in Detroit's Lower East Side was known as Paradise Valley. Most of the Purple Gang's core members went to Bishop School, where many had been placed in the division for problem children. The gang members were mostly American-born children of Jewish immigrants, primarily from Russia and Poland, who had come to the United States in the Great Immigration Wave of 1881 to 1914. So who actually founded the gang? Researchers discovered fundamental information linking the earlier development of the Purple Gang and its leader, Hyman Bernstein, to the UK and Australia. Solomon Bernstein and his sons, Hyman and Philip, peddlers of fake jewelry and counterfeit goods, ventured many times to Australia and other British colonies to engage in these practices. It was noted in trial proceedings that Hyman had resided in Australia for roughly 10 years, from around 1890 to 1900. The Bernstein forgery trial surrounded the most audacious counterfeiting racket the world had seen, which began upon Hyman's return to London, attracting international press coverage. The Bernstein brothers were found guilty, but released earlier than their sentence period, in 1910, due to UK Home Secretary Winston Churchill's nationwide push to ease pressure on its costly and overcrowded penal system. Soon after release, the Bernsteins, including a very young Abe Bernstein, migrated to the US. Records indicate the Bernsteins initially settled with home bases in Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, and Detroit. Under the leadership of Hyman and Philip, sons Abe, Joe, Raymond, and Izzy Bernstein had moved to Detroit from New York City, whereby they became ruthless operators. The Purple Gang started off as petty thieves and extortionists, but they quickly progressed to armed robbery and truck hijacking. They gained notoriety for their operations and savagery, and they imported gangsters from other cities to work as muscle for their gang. There are various theories as to the origin of the name Purple Gang. One version says that a member of the gang was a boxer who wore purple shorts during his bouts. Another was that the name came from a conversation between two unknown shopkeepers. "These boys are not like the other children of their age. They're tainted, off color." "Yes," replied the other shopkeeper. "They're rotten, purple like the color of bad meat. They're a purple gang." In 1929, there were about 25,000 illegal saloons in Detroit, so there was a large business for bootleggers, including the Purple Gang. The gang became hijackers and gained a reputation for stealing the alcohol cargoes of older and more established criminal gangs. Eventually establishing their own means of transporting alcohol, the gang enlisted the Little Jewish Navy to carry alcohol over the Detroit River from Canada before selling it themselves. The notorious Chicago gangster Al Capone began a business accommodation with the Purple Gang to prevent a bloody war. For several years, the gang managed the prosperous business of supplying Canadian whiskey to the Capone organization. By the late 1920s, the Purple Gang reigned supreme over the Detroit underworld, controlling the city's vice, gambling, liquor, and drug trade. They also ran the local wire service, providing horse racing information to local horse betting parlors. The gang members consorted with more infamous mobsters, branching into other cities as well. Abe Bernstein was a friend of Meyer Lansky and Joe Adonis, with whom he owned several Miami, Florida gambling casinos in his later years. The gang hijacked prize fight films and forced movie theaters to show them for a high fee. They also defrauded insurance companies by staging fake accidents. Altogether, the Purple Gang is alleged to have been responsible for 500 murders in the city. As the Purple Gang expanded its power, its grip on Detroit increasingly destructive. Among its members were Abe Axler and Eddie Fletcher, who were said to have been brought in from New York, though some accounts claim they were locals from Detroit. In 1927, 9 Purples, Abe Bernstein, Raymond Bernstein, Irving Milberg, Eddie Fletcher, Joe Miller, Irving Shapiro, Abe Kaminsky, Abe Axler and Simon Axler were arrested on charges of conspiring to extort money from the city's wholesale cleaners and dyers. In the end, however, all 9 men were acquitted. Mob wars were a common occurrence during this time in Detroit, as Italian, Irish, and Jewish bootleggers clashed over control of territory. The Purple Gang found themselves in a bloody turf battle with the Licavoli brothers, Tommy and Pete, who led the rival Licavoli squad. In March 1927, 3 men were murdered in what authorities believed was payback for a double cross. Ironically, the victims had originally been brought into Detroit as hired killers for the Purple Gang. The shootings took place in an apartment rented by Purple members Eddie Fletcher and Abe Axler, along with Fred Burke, a known associate of the gang who had ties to St. Louis's Egan's Rats. Their connection to the crime scene made them prime suspects. This would be known as the Milaflores massacre. Fletcher, Axler, Burke, and other Purple Gang associates were interrogated, but no one was ever convicted. Notably, these killings are believed to mark the first time a submachine gun was used in a Detroit gangland slang. The Purple Gang was long suspected of having a hand in the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago. On February 19th, 1929, Abe Bernstein allegedly phoned rival gang leader Bugs Moran, claiming that a shipment of hijacked liquor was being sent his way. Moran, then locked in a violent turf war with Al Capone, had only recently begun dealing with Bernstein, who up until then had been one of Capone's main suppliers of Canadian whiskey. But the next morning, instead of booze, Moran's crew was met by 4 armed men at the SMC Cartage Garage on North Clark Street. 2 were disguised as police officers, and all were carrying Thompson submachine guns. The attackers lined up Moran's men and unleashed a hail of gunfire, killing 7. Although witnesses and some pieces of evidence pointed toward Fred Killer Burke's involvement, he was never formally charged. By 1931, tensions within the Purple Gang itself had begun to boil over. An internal feud turned deadly when 3 members, Herman Paul, Isidore Sucker, and Joseph Levovitz, were killed after violating the gang's territorial code. Lured to an apartment on Collingwood Avenue on September 16th, under the pretense of attending a peace meeting, the men were ambushed and shot by Chicago hitmen brought in to settle the dispute. Authorities moved quickly, catching several suspects, including Abe Axler, Irving Milberg, and Eddie Fletcher playing cards inside Fletcher's apartment. Other members such as Ray Bernstein and Harry Keywell were also arrested. These murders would share the same name as the avenue it took place on, the Collingwood massacre. Irving Milberg, Harry Keywell, and Raymond Bernstein, 3 leading members of the Purple Gang, were convicted of first-degree murder for their roles in the Collingwood massacre and sentenced to life in prison. The trio was transported under heavy guard aboard a special Pullman train to Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where they began serving their terms at the state's maximum security prison in Marquette. Another gang member, Harry Fletcher, managed to evade capture until 1932. Though never convicted in connection with the massacre, he later served time at Jackson Prison, the world's largest walled prison, for his role in an armed robbery of an Oakland County gambling house in the early 1950s. Detroit's chief of detectives, James E. McCarty, would later remark the convictions from the Collingwood case had broken the back of the once powerful Purple Gang, effectively ending more than 5 years of dominance, violence, and fear. For years, the Purple Gang operated almost untouchable. Witnesses were too terrified to testify against them, and the police rarely interfered. This gave the Purples an inflated sense of power. They became arrogant, sloppy, and flashy, wearing stylish clothes, spending their nights in Detroit's hotspots, and flaunting their wealth in lavish homes. To the public, they even carried a strange, romanticized reputation that set them apart from other gangs. But behind the scenes, jealousy, ego, and infighting were pulling the Purples apart. As the gang left behind more evidence of their crimes, law enforcement finally started to close in. Philip Keywell was convicted of murder, while brothers Joe and Abe Bernstein eventually faced long prison terms, despite having dodged justice for years through intimidation and corruption. Bloodshed within the gang escalated. Abe Axler and Eddie Fletcher, 2 aggressive leaders, were shot down. Henry Shore, once a partial boss, was also killed in the chaos. Members drifted away, some fled Detroit, others were executed by rivals, and many ended up in prison. In the end, a rival Sicilian mob decided they had had enough and moved to wipe out what remained of the Purples. The gang lingered in a weakened state, but their power was gone. Their downfall left an opening that was quickly filled by the predecessors of Detroit's Mafia, marking the end of the once feared Purple Gang. Now, you're probably wondering what happened to founding members and brothers Hyman and Philip. It is unknown what happened to Philip. It's assumed he perished in the constant violence of the time. Researchers later uncovered that Hyman Bernstein went on to run a steel yard on the outskirts of Chicago, alongside businessman William Skidmore. The seemingly modest scrap operation was actually tied to tax evasion, money laundering, and illegal gambling, activities that soon brought Skidmore under investigation by Inland Revenue. While Skidmore faced mounting legal trouble, Bernstein, though curiously never implicated, took steps to erase his identity. He legally changed his name to Jerry Laukus through deed poll and even staged his own death. Researchers found evidence of this, including obituaries placed by his son, Abe, just before the trial. By continuing to live under the Laukus alias, and never by registering a death under that name, Bernstein managed to stay hidden in plain sight. He lived quietly until 1954, passing away at the age of 92. His family published genuine obituaries at the time, but officially, Jerry Laukus was not recorded as deceased until 2005. The most recent 2025 findings position Hyman Bernstein as one of the most influential and successful mob bosses in the 20th century organized crime. Thank you for watching this video on the Purple Gang. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below on who or what we should cover next.